The presidents of China and Russia have met for highly anticipated talks in Uzbekistan. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are attending the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation summit. Now, Mr. Putin thanked his Chinese counterpart for maintaining a balanced position on Ukraine, and he condemned what he calls U.S. provocations in the Taiwan Strait. Now, it was their first in-person meeting since Russia invaded Ukraine at the end of February. The Shanghai Cooperation Organisation summit has been described as an alternative to Western alliances. The war in Ukraine and geopolitical tensions are expected to dominate the talks. Ahead of the meeting, Chinese President Xi Jinping stepped up trade and development ties with Central Asian leaders. China and Uzbekistan have inked a $15 billion investment agreement. President Xi also spoke about the need to increase the size and scale of natural gas cooperation with Turkmenistan. And he pledged to deepen cooperation with Tajikistan in areas such as transit and anti-terrorism. India-China ties also in the spotlight at the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to meet with President Xi on Friday. It will be their first face-to-face talks since deadly border clashes in 2020 frayed relations between the Asian rivals. Mr. Modi will also sit down with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss trade and food supplies. Rosie joins us live from Samarkand in Uzbekistan. Now, Rosie, do you have any more details for us from the talks between the two presidents, Xi and Putin?
The details are just emerging as we speak, and as we heard from that report, there's really a star-studded lineup here in Samarkand. Lots of world leaders, but all eyes truly are on that bilateral meeting between President Putin of Russia and President Xi Jinping of China. Now, we've had some lines out from the Russian side. According to the RIA news agency, Russian President Vladimir Putin condemned attempts, he described, trying to create a unipolar world order, so condemned attempts toward unipolarity. He also condemned what he called US and satellite provocations in the Taiwan Strait. So that's something which will likely be music to the ears of Beijing. Beyond that, he also spoke particularly about the war in Ukraine, or of course, as Russian President Vladimir Putin would call it, the special military operation in Ukraine. Putin said he highly valued China's quote-unquote balanced position. Remember, China has not explicitly condemned Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, though it hasn't offered explicit backing either. And with that in mind, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that he understands Beijing's concerns and that he will seek to clarify Moscow's position. Now, that, of course, will raise some eyebrows across the West and, of course, many countries which have sanctioned Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. I'm sure they'll say there's not much explaining to be doing when there's been a breach of international law with that invasion. Now, beyond this, Putin overall pointed to the fact, he said, that this meeting will be an impetus to deepen ties with China, to try and further relations between the two sides, and particularly when it comes to trade. He said that by the end of this year, trade turnover could be up to $200 billion US, which he said would be record-breaking. So it does seem that this is two superpowers getting closer together in what many analysts will say is an attempt to try and shift the global balance of power away from the West.
So, Rosie, aside from this bilateral meeting, give us an overview. What are the leaders at the SCO summit expected to focus on today as well as tomorrow?
Well, it's a meeting which focuses in many ways on security cooperation, and that was the origin story of this organisation, which was originally founded between China, the Central Asian states and Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, when China no longer had just one border with the Soviet Union, but a border with several countries, including, for example, Kazakhstan. Now, those Central Asian states, which are at the heart of this organisation, will have an opportunity to sort of complain to one regional power about the other. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine, while those states certainly haven't condemned it openly, it has been a source of discomfort for them insofar as a lot of their trade with Europe, a lot of their trade in goods, etc., their exports have been disrupted because they previously went through Russia, through that northern Russian route, and that can no longer take place. Beyond that, we are also expecting this group to expand. The group has expanded once in 2017 when it welcomed Pakistan and India into the folds, and now Iran's government says it's signed documentation to advance toward becoming a full member. Iran has been trying to sign up to this group for more than a decade. So far, that has not proved successful, but now it looks like Tehran will be getting what it wants, and this will be seen in Tehran as a big diplomatic breakthrough, a bid to try and avoid global isolation. And of course, that's really a key message here overall for Russian President Vladimir Putin in particular. For him, it's a chance to show that despite Western sanctions, or to try and show that despite those sanctions, he still has friends on the world stage, that he still has people around that are willing to talk with him, talk in detail, and indeed to deepen cooperation, despite, of course, this condemnation from across the globe for this ongoing brutal invasion of Ukraine, and a difficult time for Vladimir Putin as well, of course, given the fact that Ukraine is making some significant gains on the battlefield and recapturing some parts of lost territory.
Many thanks for that report there. Rosie Burchard coming to us live from Samarkand, Uzbekistan.
Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping told his Russian counterpart that he wants to inject stability and positive energy into a chaotic world. Let's get more from Olivia Xiong, reporting from Beijing. Ollie, is the consensus from the Beijing side the same, that President Xi and President Putin are forging closer ties?
Yeah, that's right. We're seeing these initial remarks from the Chinese president out of that meeting with his Russian counterpart. President Xi reportedly calling President Putin his dear and longtime friend, saying that China is willing to work with Russia as, quote, great powers and play a guiding role to inject stability and positive energy into a world rocked by social turmoil. Now, this initial display of friendship and unity between the two countries is pretty much what observers had expected going into this closely watched meeting, especially as both sides continue to face pressure from the West. Mr. Xi likely to be pleased with what he's hearing from Mr. Putin, saying that Russia stands with China and that backs Beijing's one China policy when it comes to Taiwan, and that it opposes provocations by the U.S. in the Taiwan Strait. But perhaps the talks may not be so simple as they go on, and we'll have to wait and see and look out for further details at the end of the meeting, because the backdrop of this discussion is the war in Ukraine. It's the first time that the two leaders are meeting since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Mr. Putin thanked China for its balanced position on Ukraine, but also acknowledged that China had questions and concerns on the matter, and that he would explain in detail Russia's position on the issue, even though they have spoken on this before. Now, China has so far refused to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It has also spoken out against Western sanctions on Moscow, even though China has maintained that it has a neutral position on the issue. So it will remain to be seen how Mr. Xi handles this very delicate issue, China also being very mindful that it has not provided any sort of military support to Russia, even as Russia has now faced setbacks on the battlefield in Ukraine. And so we will be looking to see how Mr. Xi will handle this diplomatic tightrope that China has been walking. But, analysts are saying that it's quite unlikely that China will want to go too far to show too much support to Russia in case of any sort of fallout that it may have with the West, and that's something it would be mindful of. So analysts are expecting a continued reaffirmation of this bilateral relationship between China and Russia, but also a delicate balance by Mr. Xi.
Still, is there some political cash to this meeting, given the timing of President Xi's visit to Central Asia and the upcoming Chinese Communist Party Congress that takes place next month?
The timing, Jill, is extremely key here. This is Mr. Xi's first overseas trip that he's making in more than 2 years since the COVID-19 pandemic began. And his visit has been covered extensively throughout the day in Chinese state media and its primetime news broadcast that was just a short while ago. A show of strength and China's influence on the world stage will be a win for Mr. Xi ahead of that Communist Party Congress, this twice-a-decade meeting that's to take place next month in Beijing. And so and that's where we are expecting Mr. Xi to be granted an unprecedented third term as party leader. And so this trip is of great significance for him. Also remember that Mr. Xi is attending the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation summit, which is seen as a means to show up cooperation with Central Asian countries as a counterweight to Western-led organizations.
Olivia Xiong in Beijing, thank you.